I think there will be some of those moments for you with what Jake has to share. And so excited to have Dr. Jake Downs with us, really speaking about comprehension. And we've learned a lot about comprehension that is it's contrary to how I was trained. I think it's probably contrary to how many of you were trained. We know more now, and it's just being able to take that and say, okay, what does that mean for my practice, and how do I adjust to really get better results out of the outcome of comprehension? With that said, just a little bit about the Reading League. If you're new to us, we are 1 year in as a chapter in Utah. This is in 46 states now have a Reading League, and it really is just an organization that is looking to advance the evidence-based practice of literacy instruction in classrooms across the country, and really giving us those evidence-based practices that yield better outcomes. We all work really hard as teachers, and how do we get better results? Because it's not the effort that we're putting in, it's usually the what we're doing and how we might be able to get better outcomes with our students. And we have a wide variety of participants or like members in the Reading League Utah. Some of you might be members, some of you are just joining us today because you're like, oh, I saw this webinar, promoted on some social media or somebody told you about it. We're glad to have you. But we do have membership that gets like free access to our webinar series all year. We've got some great ones coming up after Dr. Jake Downs today that we'll speak to you at the end of the day, but really just a broad base of higher education, teachers, in-service teachers, pre-service teachers, instructional coaches, administrators. You can think if it's a role in education, they're probably signed up as part of our Reading League membership. And just to give you a little introduction and for Jake to get to know who's in the room, in the chat box, if you will go ahead and put in your name, role, and maybe your location, where you are within the country or within Utah. Most of our membership is local, but we pull in people from across the country in these sessions, which is super fun. And I'm going to introduce Jake after I introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Thronson. I am just your host. I basically handle the recording and the welcome. If you need anything, I serve as the events manager for the Reading League Utah here in Utah on the board, and really just looking for ways to support educators across this great state to advance our literacy knowledge so we can better impact kids. So that is a little bit about me. And then for Jake, Dr. Jake Downs is an assistant professor at Utah State University in the School of Education. Jake, I believe you were hired on as the science of reading expert for that university as part of our 2020 SB 127 legislation, that we needed people who knew a lot about literacy to be hired into these roles in educator preparation so we could better prepare our teachers. So thank you for stepping into that role, Dr. Downs. He also runs the Teaching Literacy podcast, which you may have caught him on, where he interviews experts in this space to get those high leverage practices out to the rest of us who maybe don't have time to read the research. Give me the 45-hour podcast and I can do that on my drive to work or on the road. He's also been featured on Melissa and Lori Love Literacy, which is one of the top literacy podcasts in the country. And the one that I've already listened to, Jake, was your paired oral reading, which is really how to use structured strategic pairs to advance literacy and getting kids to read with some scaffolding. And you've got one coming up now. So the one first on your screen, Read Like Us, Building Fluency Through Repeated Reading and Challenging Text, is coming out soon. Jake, do you have a release date for that one?
Oh, it's in my email. I think it's within the next week or two. It is
Okay.
it is February, and I think
Okay,
early
it's this
February.
month. I know I remember seeing their February lineup and you were on it. So if you haven't listened to the paired oral reading, I would highly encourage you to. There's some great simple things we can do a little bit differently in your classroom instruction to really yield some greater reading practice for all in your class. So Jake, from there, I'm going to stop sharing my slides if you want to take over and share
Yeah,
anything that you have, if you have slides, and then we're going to hand things off to you and we'll wrap
awesome.
things up about 7 o'clock.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Dr. Thronson. And I generally avoid the term expert does not appeal to me. So I care a lot about reading comprehension. I care about kids in school and very grateful for the opportunity to be with you all tonight. All right, let me just make sure that I got it, real estate management on Zoom, making sure everything's where I want it to be. So today we're just going to talk about calibrating comprehension, of trying to think about how do we make sense of standards? How do we make sense of curriculum? How do we make sense of high leverage practices? Because Often we feel like we're getting pelted with those and that they're pulling us in different directions, but they really shouldn't be. That we should be able to understand how standards, curriculum, and high leverage practices all fit together. And it's not just an instructional convenience that we do it that way. I think it's an instructional imperative that, in fact, that's the only way that we can support reading comprehension with our readers. Um, there's already background there about me. I will just say I have my link tree is linkter.ee and then Dr. Jake Downs. There's I have different folders there. It just links you basically to a Google Drive folder where I have some articles that have been written for practitioners, some articles that have been written for a research audience, some there's uh, some articles that I wrote for the for ULEAD as part of USBE, for to be practitioner facing. So there's different things there that you might want to check out. And I have a cute family. They're on the right. Uh, they're all characters, so that's us. Where we're headed tonight is we're going to talk about why comprehension feels like whack-a-mole. We're going to talk about one major trap to productive comprehension, and then we're going to talk about one major mind shift for productive comprehension. And then last, we're going to finish up with just some brief examples. We like I said, we're barely going to be able to scratch the surface here, but Um, hopefully this is enough to start thinking about comprehension a little bit different way and help us be really in the driver's seat more with what we're trying to do. A lot of tonight's presentation really stems back to me as a first year teacher trying to do comprehension instruction. I was a fourth grade teacher and I had no clue what I was doing. I felt like I was really busy with the curriculum. I felt like I was doing lots of things, and we're going to come back to things later tonight, but I had no idea whether I was supporting reading comprehension or not. And looking back, I probably really wasn't. The kids that were already good in text were still good in text, and the kids that weren't, still weren't. And so this has sort of been my trajectory is how do we do comprehension? And that's kind of led me down, well, other paths as well. So teaching what reading comprehension. This is what it often feels like that we're just playing whack-a-mole, that I've got a mole here that I've got to whack, and I've got a mole over there that I've got to whack, and a mole over here that I've got to whack. And most of our instructional time is just doing whack-a-mole across the curriculum. And maybe it's hitting this standard over here and that standard over there. And whack-a-mole is actually a very tiring way to go, and it's also like not very productive, right? That there's always just another mole sticking their head up out of the ground, and I've got to whack it, and oh wait, here's the grammar one, clear off here in the background, and oh, I don't know what to do with grammar, so we're just going to let that one be. So it's very intimidating because it does feel like there's so many things that we're trying to do. This is more what it should feel like, that we're able to feed multiple birds with one hand, right? Rather than trying to hit over here and over there, that sort of with one action we can support multiple aspects of comprehension. And this is in that same vein of I don't think this is an instructional um, convenience or an instructional nicety. This is the only way to do comprehension instruction. If we're just doing whack-a-mole for reasons I'll explain, if we're just doing whack-a-mole, we're actually not doing reading comprehension instruction at all. We might be doing something else, but it's hard to call it reading comprehension instruction. So we've talked about the reading rope a lot, and that's been a frequent area of discussion over the last 7-8 years, which I think is a productive thing, because it's really helped us hone in on specific aspects of reading that matter. There are a couple considerations that I would say about thinking about the rope and about reading comprehension that we also should be paying attention to. So one, yes, there are strands to the rope, that there are ingredients to the cake we're trying to bake. But we can't forget that there's also a rope, right? That these threads are supposed to weave together. And when we weave them together, we have the rope. What's the major property of a rope? Well, with a rope, the tensile strength, the amount of weight that the rope can hold, is actually greater than the sum of what the individual threads could hold. So the we can't forget that in the end, we're trying to get to skilled reading, which means the threads aren't going to weave themselves. We have to think about ways to weave the threads to get to skilled reading, which we would call comprehension. So that's a major implication I think that we need to be talking more about is how to weave these together, or in other words, how do they naturally work together rather than just operate as individual threads. Another thing that I think we should really talk about as well is explicit does not mean siloed. Explicit instruction just means being very clear, having an instructional target, something we're working towards, and providing modeling experiences and not students having opportunities to respond to gain proficiency in that area. Siloing does not necessarily need to be part of explicit instruction. Now, when something is new, right, we want to have it be break it down to its essence and be able to introduce it in a simple way. Um, but it doesn't have to stay like that forever. In fact, it shouldn't as students gain proficiency. So siloing skills is actually a design choice that curriculum and to a degree standards often take. It's not a pedagogical imperative. So explicit instruction, yes. We do want to be very clear about the things we're trying to show students, but we also want to provide modeling for students to have something to mimic when they're getting their sea legs with text. Um, but we want integrated as well. And that's a double yes, that comprehension instruction without trying to weave those threads is actually going to always be underwhelming no matter how explicit we're being. We have to integrate aspects of comprehension to get them to work together. So in that same vein, let's talk about a major comprehension trap. And I don't know what else to call it. I'm sure there's more academic ways of terming it, but I just call it the comprehension things. So here's the definition of this is Jake's definition of comprehension things. It's anything that you've been told in the past to do to support comprehension. So maybe you've been told to teach standards. Maybe you've been told to do reading strategies. 10 years ago, close reading was very hot and everyone was talking about it. I haven't heard anyone talk about close reading, I don't know, probably since the pandemic. So do we care about that still? Do we not care about it? What's the deal there? So there's a whole big list of things of what we've been told to teach. And that's why I call it marching monkeys, because we can literally list dozens of quote unquote comprehension practices. And we need to have a way to think about those comprehension things that's going to actually get them to have traction with comprehension. So, how do these connect with what comprehension actually is, how it works in the brain? This is from this is the Rand's definition of comprehension back from 2002, and they talk about reading comprehension as being sort of the intersection between the text, the reader, and the task. Specifically, they say that the comprehension is the process of simultaneously extracting and constructing meaning through interaction and involvement with written language, and it consists of three elements: the reader, the text, and the activity for purpose. So, in other words, to have comprehension, there has to be those three things. Obviously, there has to be a reader and a text, but there also has to be an activity, or a lot of times, we'll frame this as a purpose for reading. You're going to read a recipe a lot different than how you're going to read your favorite novel. That the activity or the reason you're reading actually does a lot of the framing for how the reading is conducted. So, in other words, if using that definition, if we're going to truly support comprehension, we have to engage the reader in tasks that teach the text. That the best way to do text comprehension is at the end, they've comprehended the text. And that becomes a useful heuristic that I use to say, is this thing you're doing, is it helping the student interact with the text in order to pull things out of the text to build a mental model or a representation of what that text is saying? So are you using tasks that are going to help teach the text? If the answer to that is yes, then it's probably a productive approach and it's worth considering. If the answer to that is no, then it's probably not a productive approach to comprehension and probably not worth considering or worth adapting or adjusting so that text extraction construction becomes more of a becomes the front burner of what we're trying to do. So this is a list of going back to the comprehension things, the March of the Monkeys. And this is just, I mean, this is a list I used AI to develop, right? But it's just a list of a whole bunch of different things that, at different various times have been used to support comprehension. I like some of them more than I like others, but these become it's not whether any one of these practices are useful, yes or no. And I'll get asked that sometimes, right? Like, well, what's your take on KWL chart? Or what's your take on reading strategies? Or what's your take on questioning techniques? And my take always goes back to this. If it's being used in such a way to excavate information from the text to build a mental model, then it's going to be productive. If it's not, well, then it's not. So for me, comprehension instruction is actually less about the specific practice. There's lots of practices we can use. That's not where the money is at. What comprehension instruction is about is the mindset of we're going to use these practices to leverage meaning from text. So a lot of times the comprehension things, like it's just this endless march of monkeys, but it feels more like this, especially when if you're in a busy curriculum that has lots of specific tasks and, for a specific text, you've got 12 to 15 or even more specific tasks to do with for comprehension instruction, that gets really overwhelming. And so then teachers try to sprint faster, but sprinting faster just tires you out quicker. So we need to find a way to rein in the monkeys so that we're in the driver's seat instead of just this endless march taking us over. So we find comprehension tasks that we can use to interact with the text to build the mental representation of the text or to build a summary level understanding of what the text is saying. So this is another way I like to talk about it is like with a teeter-totter where you have a load on one side, a fulcrum, and then, what it's lifting on the other side. So the comprehension tasks we're doing, they are not outcomes in and of themselves. They're not what we're trying to do. So if we're doing inferencing, the goal isn't inferencing. The goal is to use inferencing to help students understand the text. So we should never say, wow, I just really need a text where I can teach my students inferencing. It should be, what text do I want my students to read? And then using inferences as a way to leverage meaning from it. So it's not this. It's not using text as the fulcrum to lift the individual comprehension things. It's actually, we need to flip those two, where we have instruction and we're using comprehension things. Maybe it's a KWL chart. Maybe it's a graphic organizer. Maybe it's scaffolding a text-based question. Maybe it's using rich vocabulary from the text. But whatever thing we're doing has to be able to excavate meaning from the text. If we're not doing that, we're just playing whack-a-mole. So those individual things, they are not discrete skills. They're not discrete proficiencies in and of themselves. They are the thing that we use to promote text comprehension. So that's all. That's generally a bit of a mind shift for folks, and we're kind of going to circle back to it, but this next part helps, I think, provide some context around it as well, because the other big mind shift that I think this one is really important, and this is when comprehension instruction started to click for me when I started to understand this. And it's the idea of comprehension having a hierarchy. So, in other words, there's a hierarchical aspect to comprehension where lower level aspects are nested within higher level aspects. And being from extreme northern Utah, I'm contractually obligated to provide Napoleon Dynamite memes. So where do the chickens have large talons? And the farmer goes, I don't understand a word you just said. And sometimes when I start talking comprehension hierarchy with teachers, I see eyes glaze over, but it's actually fantastic. So when I say the hierarchy of comprehension, all I mean is that comprehension instruction just needs to be dominoes that topple into each other. So it's not a text vocabulary domino that we whack over here, and then a text understanding vocabulary or domino or mole that we whack over there, or knowledge building that we whack over there, or syntax and paragraph that we whack over there. This is how the reading brain makes sense of text. That it extracts words from the page. It links those words to meaning. It connects meaning across small portions of text like syntax or paragraphs, and it accumulates and aggregates to where you have whole text understanding. And then we can read multiple texts that are similarly related, and that can topple into a domino of knowledge building. And that's how comprehension works when we are reading. And so in many other aspects, if we mimic the process of how the brain is making sense of text, we actually can be much more productive. Comprehension hierarchies aren't this hierarchy isn't anything too new, although it might feel a little foreign, because we've actually already done this with reading foundations. I think this has been the crux of the science of reading movement, even if we haven't quite labeled it that way, of saying that, well, phonemic awareness is important because we need it to build alphabet knowledge, because we need it to build basic decoding, because we need that to support automatic word recognition and text accuracy. Those are dominoes that are toppling into each other. And even I think current conversation, like around phonemic awareness, is it should integrate letters, it should integrate manipulatives, and you should focus on phoneme blending and phoneme segmenting because that's what most closely mimics the decoding aspects that we're going to layer on with orthography. So we're trying to do the same thing with early literacy of having these be dominoes that topple into each other. It just so happens that this is a continuation of the more basic version or the more foundational version with reading development. So in trying to go from playing whack-a-mole to trying to go to feeding two birds with one hand, we can use standards in the same way because, and this is I think, a very fruitful activity to do is you can look at the individual reading standards, especially the comprehension ones. So standards, 5 through 14, and they align pretty well with these four levels. That there's some that are really related to the text vocabulary. There's some that are related to syntax and paragraph, but even just portions of the text, right? See, something that's bigger than word level understanding, but smaller than text level understanding. And there's some standards that align really well with text level understanding, and there's some standards that align really well with knowledge building across texts. And so it's not, this either or thing. It's actually both and. It's that within a single text, I can do a little bit with text vocabulary, use that to do a little bit with portions of the text, like syntax or paragraph, use that to do a little bit with whole text understanding. And lo and behold, I repeat that with several texts. I'm able to get top of this last one, which is actually doing stuff with that text comprehension, like building knowledge. Like building knowledge and productive ELA instruction for comprehension aren't actually like they are one and the same. That our comprehension instruction is being productive to the degree that it's building student knowledge around specific concepts. And there's some curriculum out there that brand themselves as we are the knowledge building curriculum. And that might mean they use a higher proportion of informational text and they might have more coherence in how those texts are organized. But there's still a lot of swing and miss in execution and how that's done because the stacking within a single text is actually most important. And that's one finding we know from the comprehension research is that strategy, using multiple strategies within the same text or using like one strategy for an entire week. Well, we know the data says that it's actually better to use multiple strategies in tandem, multiple comprehension practices in tandem. A lot of teachers say, well, how the heck do I do that? And once you have this framework, it's actually very straightforward that I'm going to do some stuff with text vocabulary. I'm going to do some stuff with chunks of text. I'm going to do some stuff with text understanding, but I'm going to make sure that those sequentially build towards one another, and it becomes very straightforward to do. So let me just run through and give you some examples. One example I like to talk about is with vocabulary instruction. And the question I like to ask there is, are we just trying to fill a sandbox one grain of sand at a time? There's thousands of words that our kids could know, and I'm a proponent for explicitly teaching vocabulary. I think it's important. I know it's important, but we don't just want to teach random words because when we just sort of pick random words, do a couple low levels exposures with it, don't revisit those words over time, and don't support students integrating that into their lexicon, we're not being where we are trying to fill a sandbox one grain at a time. It's going to be much more productive to be able to use words from the text, and we use that as a domino to topple into understanding portions of the text or the whole text. Let me show you what I mean. This is from the Wonders curriculum, and this is fifth grade, Creating a Nation. And here's the words that the curriculum curated to use for vocabulary instruction. And if you look at these words, representatives, situation, resolve, convention, proposal, committees, debate, union, these are pretty strong words that have a lot of text meaning wrapped up into them. Now, oftentimes we don't treat it that way. We have our vocabulary words be completely separate and we don't do anything with it in text. But the whole reason those words were curated in the first place is because they're from the text. So you don't have to teach all of these words. In fact, I would recommend teaching a handful, right? Two, three, or four. But it's those two, three, or four words that those are ride or die words that you're committing to 10 to 14 exposures before reading, during reading, and after reading. Well, with a word like representatives, that actually becomes quite easy to do because, okay, creating a nation, it's all about representation. It's about not having representation. It's about creating an organization, like a convention where we can start to have our own representation. So words are not just words, words represent concepts. And so we can take concepts from the text that are also essential vocabulary and use that to help students understand the text. There's also a whole bunch of other words in the text that aren't listed as potential vocabulary words. And so the reality is there's more words to teach in a text to help students understand it than we have time to do even with a single text. You don't have time to teach 30 words, from a text that's a couple pages. So the strategy is a couple of high leverage words, commit to those, use those as concepts to teach the text, and then along the way, you're pulling a dragnet to try and get whatever ever academic vocabulary along with it. So, in other words, rather than just sort of teaching random words, we can use words to help students understand the text, and we can use the text to help students understand the word. So, if I was teaching this text, out of all these words, I would pick representatives and I would pick independence, which independence actually wasn't one of the recommended ones. But just with those two words, those can be ride or die words that are concepts of the text that we can get a lot of text meaning out of. And I wish we had like 5 days to unpack all of this, but there's a lot of room to harvest there. Another example that I wanted to talk about was thinking about a cross-text. We're kind of going to the other end of the spectrum, right? Previously we're talking about using, high leverage words that we can do a lot of text work with that's going to help us understand the text. But what about going across text at the other end of the spectrum? One great way to curriculum tends to be organized by an essential question, right? So with Wonders, into reading, other curriculum as well, those are two of the more prevalent ones in the state. CKLA is a little bit, operates a little bit differently, but they have an essential question. So what do good problem solvers do? And then we're going to, read around that for a couple weeks. And it's interesting to me that most curriculum have this thematic opportunity to cut across text. Like it's there. It is right there, but it's totally a swing and a miss because they typically just sort of present the unit that way. Here's a bunch of related text, and they do nothing about it. So the goal there is we're trying to synthesize across the text to build knowledge around a topic. So the way that you do this is by the end of the module, students should have a lot to say about that essential question. Well, how do we do that in practice? So with this one, this is from Wonders fifth grade, building knowledge. What do good problem solvers do? And we have all of these texts that are building knowledge about or that we can use to build knowledge around what good problem solvers do. And in this case, in the context of the American Revolution and that time frame. And this is what I mentioned about curriculum just having a swing and a miss here is the Grumpy Old Men, fun movie, early 90s, right? They just say it's weak because it's just not heavy hitting enough to actually have knowledge creation around, those topics. So one way that we can do it is we just do a simple knowledge matrix. So on the left, hey, here's a text. And then when we finish the text, here's a key idea about it. 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 And we do that with each text. And then lo and behold, this is actually from a third grade module from Into Reading. What can sports teach us about working together? Well, we have a lot that we can say about unity across those texts. We have a lot we can say about collaboration. We have a lot we can say about determination. We have a lot we can say about symbiosis. So even though at times the way core reading programs are designed, it's these really short texts that aren't connected to each other. They really are. We just have to have the we just have to be able to see where they're cross-cutting, and that's what we bring out with our instruction. So by the end of if every text I'm saying, we let's look at unity, let's look at collaboration, let's look at the theme of determination and symbiosis, and we do that with every text, well, A, they'll be able to talk about each text really clearly, but B, they can transcend that, right? They can have abstraction beyond just the meaning of the text comprehension to be able to answer the essential question. So the question then is, well, then and that was just two examples. We could do chunks of text stuff. We could do whole text stuff as well. Um, I just time-wise, I wasn't sure where things would shake out. But next question is, well, are standards worthless then, right? Like if it's just all about this comprehension hierarchy, like what's the role of standards? And that should say no instead of now. But no, they're not. But the way the students improve in the individual standards is by using those standards for a purpose and having them stack and topple with other dominoes. So if some school districts are very standards-based grading, and we have to treat the standards in ELA slightly different, I think, than other areas because in the ELA, the standards are process factors, whereas in math, it's more of an outcome. In fourth grade, I can see, can my students multiply fractions? Can they not? And it doesn't vary too much across individual numbers. The evidence is there. Whereas the ELA standards for comprehension, they are processes to get to comprehension that actually synergize, that work together. But the outcome is always text comprehension. It's just the texts rotate every single day. So the standards are not worthless, but we have to pair them with text understanding and we have to stack them together to actually have them be productive. Oh, and the good news there is it's also more engaging for the teacher and more engaging for the student. I have this crazy theory that students actually really enjoy text when it's interesting and when they're learning things from it. And when we're doing text comprehension in such a way, they are engaged because it is interesting, because it is interesting to learn about the world around us and to talk about it. Um, so it's a design choice in how we create our instruction that can help determine, whether that happens or not. So with text understanding, that's the only way that we can actually get bang for our buck out of those individual standards. So if you want to make a small tweak, if you want to have this be the emphasis of your standards, just add to understand grade level text to every comprehension standard. So 3R7, describe characters in a story and explain how their actions contribute to the sequence of events in order to understand the text. Just add that little tweak on there in the end, and it helps shift it to say, oh, the purpose is using the characters and the talking about the sequence of events to get to text understanding. That's not the outcome, that's the conduit to get there. Let's look at another. 4R13, explain how an author uses reasons and evidence to support particular claims in a text in order to understand the text, in order to promote text understanding. Helps ground it with what its true purpose is. 5R7, compare two characters, settings, or events in a story or drama, drawing on specific details in the text in order to understand the text. If you want to go really hardcore, you can add in order to understand the text after every clause. So every time there's a comma, add it. So compare two characters in order to understand the text. Compare two settings in order to understand the text. Compare events in a story or drama in order to understand the text. Draw on specific details in order to understand the text. Adding that to even any one of those sentences helps remind us that it's the text that matters. And these are the barbells to help. The text is the barbell. These are the conduits to help us get there to actually build strength and understanding in text. So if you're trying to do a text-first approach, we're trying to pull out text details. We connect the extracted text details with other text details, and we use text details to build understanding. And that's where we can actually synthesize to build knowledge across text. So uh, we've got a bit of time just to chat and to have Q&A, but I hope that blistering drive-through of Jake's brand of comprehension was productive, and really grateful for everyone's time in attending tonight. I'm happy just to have some informal chit chat or Q&A.
Thank you, Jake. It's always nice to not just get spoken to the whole time. So those of you that are here, you're welcome to type in the chat box your question. If you don't want to come off mute, you're welcome to come off mute and share your ideas. If you want to raise your hand, if you do want to come off mute, that will help me to do some orderly conduct of pulling you in. I'm going to start because that's the benefit of being the host. You get to ask the questions first. So, Jake, while people are thinking, I was just training teachers down here in Washington County, and I see a couple of colleagues down in this region here today, and on comprehension. And one of our things was really around purpose, like the purpose for the text first, and then everything else kind of falls from there. Like this is your like guiding light. Like what are you trying to get kids to learn and grow from the text instead of, well, I'm supposed to use this text to teach me an idea, which is how a
Yeah.
lot of our programs are built, right?
Yes.
So how do you help? Because the one of the ways we really looked at it today was what's the enduring understanding you want kids to walk away with? Like you've got your essential question. Is that going to be a good enough motivation interest for kids? Is that really what that text gets at? Because sometimes it's like, oh, we picked this text so it's good for inferencing, but it'll loosely fit into our theme of the module. Like how do you help people guide into finding purpose that's meaningful and goes beyond we're reading this text because we're practicing comprehension skills and strategies? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And purpose is a huge part of it because it does frame the whole comprehension process. Some really interesting studies from the 80s they did with undergrads was they gave two sets of undergrads the same text. When one set of undergrads, they said, and the text was about there's a break-in at a house. And one set of undergrads, they were told, you are the police officer, so you need to have that mindset as you're reading the text. So that was their purpose. The other, set was that we're supposed to be the homeowner. And what they found from the results with that, well, if you were assigned police officer or if you were assigned homeowner, you remembered different things based on what your role was. So the folks that were assigned to the police, they remembered more about, points of entry, timeline of when people were in and out of the house, that sort of thing. Whereas, the homeowners were sentimental value of the specific objects or monetary value, So purpose is really huge. And yes, the sort of the low-hanging fruit there is the essential question. And I think in a lot of cases that can be that can be harvested to be productive across text. But something that I recommend is when you're preparing a text, to just read it straight through, and then at the end of that, you do a self summary. So you just take 10 seconds and say, okay, what is this text about? What are its biggest ideas? Because that then can in turn be the chunks of text that you pull out, but also then you say, what is it that I want my students to pull from this text? And so that then can become the purpose for reading that also can connect to comprehension, right? Like if it's okay, how do we endure and how do we overcome obstacles to succeed or something like that, then, we can pull out chunks of that along the way. I would say it's the same thing for using text in science or social studies, right? That there needs to be a purpose. What that purpose is can be flexible. It doesn't have to be the essential question, but it could. But at the end of the day, I would just go with what do you as the teacher find interesting and engaging? Because if you find it interesting and engaging, odds are you're going to have a better shot at packaging it for your students in ways that are interesting and engaging.
Perfect. And I think it goes back to your conversation around we excavate meaning from the text. We are using the standards or the comprehension strategies in service of extracting to get to that purpose, right? Like
Yes.
we're not doing the strategies, we're trying to get to the purpose and we're using strategies that make sense to help us get there so we can extract that meaning. And it's not the other way around. Like when we're
Yes.
planning comprehension, is that what standards am I going to try and teach? It's like, what's the meaning I want kids to walk away with? Then what are the standards that will help me to get there given the text that we're using? Uh,
Yeah,
Thank you,
exactly.
Jake. It helps to like There. And we've got a question in the chat box. Um, the powers of my district are asking about providing intervention in an effort to improve RISE in 4 and 5. So in comprehension land, there's this desire in a lot of school districts, like, oh, the kids aren't doing well on RISE. And it's, broken up into key ideas and details, the different types of standards. And so now we need to give intervention because they're
Yeah.
not doing well. From what I saw from a webinar Shanahan did, it's not coming down to the kids don't know the standards. It might be the text is challenging and we need to help them to handle challenging text. But I would love to see what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, and that's a complicated one. Yes, there's text aspects there. So the first thing I'm thinking of is, well, how are students doing on oral reading fluency? How are they doing on oral reading accuracy? That won't guarantee comprehension happening, but it will stop it from happening, right? And so making sure that kids are regularly 98% or higher, in connected text accuracy, making sure that upper grades, 120 words plus is going to make sure, the ORF measure, it's not about speed, even though we time it, it's about how automatic the reading is. And so if the reading is happening automatically, that gives us more bandwidth to do things with text. Now, as far as intervention, um, I don't, we do need to scaffold intervention support and accuracy and fluency for our students that need it, but there's also good meta-analysis showing that upper elementary students handle multi-component interventions as good as, if not better than, single component interventions. So there's no reason why an intervention can't have accuracy support with fluency support and comprehension support all bundled into one. As far as specific standards, the knee-jerk reaction would be to say, here's my students that need this standard, there's a group. Here's my students that need this standard, there's a group. Here's my students that need this standard, there's a group. And I don't think that's going to be a productive process precisely because it's putting the standard as the thing rather than the standard as the leverage point. So this is something I've thought quite a bit about, and I mean, I guess, I mean, I'll go on the record and say this, that I'm not sure how well the individual standards are assessing what they purport to be assessing. And I know that there has to be a standard, there has to be a way that, I mean, I get that that's the way we do business. Um, but I also am not sure, that a lot of that is in how is the question written, how is the question designed, are the questions consistent in how they ask it. So if it were me, so if I was doing comprehension intervention, um, I would make sure that every day we're doing a text. I'd make sure I'm scaffolding the accuracy of it. So maybe I pick two or three of the really challenging words from that text. They could also be words that are relevant to the meaning of the text, and we're going to practice doing a multisyllabic blending routine with those words. I'm going to practice using productive fluency practices to harvest the text. Talk about whack-a-mole. Fluency isn't something else we do. We care about fluency because it supports local text comprehension primarily, and it can, it helps with bandwidth over time. But if a text is consumed using fluently productive practices, it has a better chance of being understood. So we're going to consume the text in productive ways. But then my game plan with every text is the exact same, more or less. We're going to do stuff with the vocabulary that we can leverage to use for chunks of text, for portions of the text that matter, that we can leverage for the whole text, that we can leverage across text. Now, where the explicitness comes in is, maybe today I'm sort of expanding the vocabulary layer to be more explicit, more clear with that, and then just sort of going through the routines at the other layers. And then the next day I'm expanding the chunks of text layer and being really clear and explicit about, okay, here's how we can answer text-based questions. And actually going to show you, I'm going to do think aloud to show you how I would think through a text-based question. You're going to mimic that, and we're going to make sure that our answer uses the language of the text, and a bonus if it's any of the academic language we were using before. That I'm going to go through it each day, but maybe each day expand it because I just I don't I don't I don't buy into the fact that one aspect of comprehension can be improved in isolation from other aspects. I think it tends to be an all or nothing, not an all or nothing thing, but they operate in tandem. And so if they operate in tandem, our instruction should really leverage that um, if we're going to be productive. Now, I don't know of any curriculum that like does that per se. It's just stacking productive practices at each of those layers and rotating through it. But you get a wide variety of text, so a single short text each day. You're cycling through vocabulary, portions of the text, the whole text, across text, and just doing a lot of really rigorous work with comprehension while supporting fluency and accuracy would be how I approach that one.
Thanks, Jake. I think that's really helpful. I think the quote I have from you from this is won't like fluency won't guarantee comprehension will happen, but it will stop it from happening. I thought was really powerful. Like, do the students have accurate, efficient word reading? If not, comprehension will be
Yeah.
impacted generally. And okay, we get that part mastered. Okay, these kids are fluent readers. Like, I think people are like, well, how do we intervene because they're not scoring well on Rise?
Yeah.
It's really how do they know how to handle difficult text? Because the
Yes.
research shows like they might be able to do main idea in a text they have a lot of knowledge about and can't
Yes.
do it in a text they don't know a lot about. I think the other thing with Rise, I'd love your opinion on this, is it's supposed to be built on science and social studies topics. And given the role of background knowledge and comprehension, if I'm an elementary teacher and I'm not teaching science and social studies, I can guarantee you they're going to have a harder time comprehending texts they have no knowledge about than topics they have knowledge on,
Yes.
right? And so you're not actually measuring comprehension, you're measuring knowledge at the end of the day in that kind of setting. Like, what would you add?
Yeah, like there's definitely an extraction process that happens that yes, background knowledge is the cause and the effect of comprehension, right? If you have background knowledge, it's going to be easier to understand the text. And if you engage with the text deeply, the outcome is going to be more background knowledge. So that's a huge layer there. Um, I I really feel strongly that text in the content areas in some ways can actually be more very productive, like even more productive than me just standing up there doing a PowerPoint. We know that the density of language within academic text is there's more academic, a higher ratio of academic words and content specific words than what you and I would use if even if we were teaching the students. We also know that most of our students, the vast majority of them, will read text faster than you or I would speak out loud. And we also know that when a new word is encountered in text, students have between a 10 and a 25% chance of incidentally learning it. Now, we should be doing explicit instruction, but vocabulary development absolutely happens through word reading volumes. So, why wouldn't we be using text to complement, maybe an observational phenomenon or, the science pedagogy we're doing, regardless an observation can't happen in a vacuum. That I can use text to build knowledge before a phenomenon observation I'm doing with science. And I'm not a science pedagogist, but we could use it before, or we could do the phenomenon and then use text after to help make connections there. But once we get really good at scaffolding text, and okay, the text is hard, so you do some repeated reading with it, right? That two or three reads gets that text really warm, really malleable, really pliable, and now all of a sudden we can harvest a bunch of meaning from it. Oh, and by the way, that's also going to help our word reading automaticity long term, as well. So, um, I'm very pro. I don't think ELA should just slowly, overtake every instructional minute throughout the day. I think if we were smart, we would keep it within a box, but then get really good at figuring out how do we use text in the content areas most efficiently.
And I appreciate like your whole presentation today is really about coherence and integrating these topics. So, like vocabulary, it's not just for that story. It's like, how is that in service of this text that we're working on, that we're building knowledge towards? And a lot of your themes of what you've shared tonight, that's one of the big ones I'm picking up. It's just, we're doing this, and it's not just like the repeated reading that builds fluency, breeds, accurate, efficient reading, which then frees up more cognitive desk space to
Yes.
comprehend the text. And so, like, yeah, we're doing fluency, but it's in service of yielding that extraction and making meaning from a text while building other, found that you were talking about not teaching skills in isolation. Like, this is an opportunity to weave fluency, vocabulary, and making meaning all together in instruction.
Yes.
Um,
I just
Go ahead.
sorry to cut you. I was just
Yeah,
say we care about all these things in the first place because they predict comprehension. I mean, that's how the science of reading has evolved is what predicts word reading and then what predicts comprehension, and then those just become things. So if we care about fluency because we care about comprehension, and if we know fluency reads to comprehension, well, it just makes sense to use productive fluency practice with texts we care about comprehension rather than here's my special text that I'm going to do fluency practice with at this part of the day. Here's my other text that, we're going to do round robin reading or turn taking with for comprehension a different part of the day. You know, coherence I think is, I not only does it simplify things, but it like drastically increases the rigor and the efficiency with which we're able to do stuff.
love it. Any questions from the group? I didn't find any more in the chat box. I'm like, I think I got those. But if anyone has an oral question or wants to put one in the chat, feel free. Otherwise, we will give you your wrap up part of the meeting. Marla, go for it.
I was just going to say some of the districts around here are doing the success criteria and learning objectives. And I really liked the way that Jake added in order to understand the text, in order to, I think that would be very, very helpful for teachers to understand that the purpose of those is so that they understand and learn from text, right? So I really like that idea. I'm going to steal that one. I think that's a
I love
great.
it.
Um, the other thing I was thinking about is one of the things that I always think about with teaching is so who's doing the thinking?
Hmm.
We have to be careful that we're not modeling everything and doing all the thinking because the kids have to learn how to do the thinking themselves, and they also need to practice comprehension. So it is one of the things that I still don't see very much in classrooms is students actually reading and practicing these types of strategies and skills that they're learning. Because that has something to do with the rise, I think, is that, they don't get any prep support, whatever. They just get a passage that they have to read cold and figure out how to, interpret it and answer questions about it. And I'm not sure they practice that very much. Just reading on their own, whether it be, with a partner or whatever. So I don't know what you think about that, the two of you.
Um, I wish I had the chart handy. Freddie Hebert has a chart in one of her studies that, I mean, almost reads like a ghost story where they mimicked, they sort of mimicked the type of, like a RISE style assessment, and they just looked at how long students were spending per passage. And what they found was the highest achieving students were very consistent. They spent the same amount of time on the first as the third as the fifth. There was five passages. And then the lowest achieving students, um, they were actually really close to the highest achievers in amount of time on the passage for the first text. And then the second text, the amount of time they spent on the passage shot way down. And it wasn't because they all of a sudden were reading a lot quicker. It's because they didn't have the stamina, right? They didn't have the persistence to hang with challenging text for even 3 to 5 minutes. And then it's sort of that's what it looked like for the third text, the fourth text, and then by the fifth text they try to bring it back. But that's something I think about quite a bit is we can't just our reading instruction doesn't need to be TikTok. We don't need to just provide 30-second shreds. Let's read a little bit, let's talk a little bit, let's read a little bit, let's talk about a little bit. We do need to find ways to scaffold text and provide opportunities to read text in such a way that, I mean, yeah, sure, to do better on the rise, sure, but a student that can hang with text for 5 or 6 minutes has a lot of different options available in their life than a student that can only hang with text for 30 seconds before they wilt.
Yeah, and I love your thing around time and text, Marla. Like, being a consultant, I get to go into, I don't know, I have over 2 dozen schools right now. And I get to see how little time is actually spent doing the thing we said we're trying to build
Yes.
readers. It's just so few minutes. And that stamina, when you're on the rise, you got to read for a while, friends.
Yep.
Like, how many opportunities are we giving in classrooms to read the length of that passage and to sustain it and potentially have to
Yes.
reread it to find information? And so I think creating more authentic settings that set kids up for success is a huge part of this work. Is like, do we actually spend that kind of time in daily instruction, not just at tested time? It's really important for us to consider. We do instructional audits where we go look at how many minutes did kids spend in that 30-minute comprehension lesson we
Yeah.
came observed, how many kids actually read, like for how long. And it can be anywhere from 3 minutes and 30 minutes because of what you said, Jake. We're stopping and asking questions on every page because in our basal, it has
Yep.
questions all around the outside. So I must have to stop every page and ask these questions. But as a good reader, how many of us stop every page and go, okay, what predictions can I make? What inference did I make? Like,
Yep.
we don't do that. Like, it's
Yep.
naturally happening. And
What
yes, we have to
random
model
stuff can
that.
I do? Right.
Yeah, it's just
Because
like,
how many of those questions are genuinely important for
for your purpose.
mental
Go
model,
to your
right?
purpose.
Yeah,
Yeah. And so
exactly.
there's so much here. We could talk forever. Jake, thank you for such a powerful conversation. I think comprehension is one of those well misunderstood parts of the work. And really, we've learned a lot in the last several years of what comprehension is and what it isn't. And I think most of our books are still on, okay, you're going to teach the story, and here's the 4 comprehension skills and strategies you're going to teach. But we have to remember, I'm going to teach those in service of what purpose?
Yep.
And then maybe I don't even need some of those, or maybe I need to bring in one we've already learned, and just being the professionals that our educators really are. So with that said, thank you so much, Jake. You have caused, I'm sure, a lot of deep thinking for many of us here tonight. Here are some ways if you're interested in staying connected with Jake. He gave you that link tree already, but it's on the screen in case you need it again or you came in late. That's where he shares a lot of his resources, how you can connect. And then his podcast, like he has some great speakers on there. Jake, you have wonderful questions for your podcast guests that I'm like, ooh, that's a deep question. I really appreciate the probably thought that goes in behind the scenes preparing for those podcasts. So if you guys haven't listened to any of Jake's podcasts, go find a topic you're interested in. I think you'll learn something. Next up, Jake is our kickoff for our February webinars, followed by Dr. Shanahan. He'll be coming to talk about the end of leveled reading, what we know in the research, and how to support students in reading challenging text, given we're not supposed to match kids to text anymore. So be excited for that one. I'm excited for it. It's going to be a conversation with him and I to kind of talk about how do we help kids, knowing we're not supposed to put kids in level text anymore, to be able to access text that they really don't have the reading skills to do on their own. So I'll put the link to that registration in the chat box. And then, sorry, it went away because it didn't need to. We'll see if I can get it back. Looks like there it is. 1 second, friends. Continue. And then the next one is Dr. Maria Murray. She is actually the president and the founder of the Reading League and started this over a decade ago. If you are not familiar with the Reading League, it's been around a while. This will really be focused on decodable text and how to effectively use a decodable in the classroom, which for those of you that have decodable text in your grades K1, 2, and maybe even 3rd grade will be really relevant for. If you're a secondary teacher, I would not recommend that particular topic, as this really will be focused on some of those early literacy types of text that we get, where it's very controlled because our kids have a certain level of knowledge and we are controlling for that. I will put that link in the chat box next if you're interested in that one. And finally, we have other webinars to finish off the season that we will also be releasing soon. So far, we have not released all of these yet. We kind of release them about a month out. So we'll be working on releasing the supporting multilinguals here shortly. And you can kind of see some others. Dr. Katie Pace Miles is going to help you with orthographic mapping, which is a really interesting topic on how you actually get kids to map words so that they know them by sight. Amy's going to talk about writing development. Nancy will talk about content area reading instruction. And then Dr. Lisa Brand will be with us to talk about dyad reading, which is a powerful partner reading activity that can really accelerate reading progress at the end of our webinar series. So Jake, thank you again for sharing all your knowledge. I won't call it expertise since you do not like the word expert. And really
Love the word
appreciate
expert, just not in relation to me.
Yeah, I get you. Thank you all. I will send out the recording. You're welcome to share it with others as you see fit. And we're just excited to have you and hope to see you again another time. Have a good night.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate the invite.
We're glad to have you. Thank you.